Welcome. Gio and I are here today with Justin Segal. He is the president of Boxer Property. I think he's in Houston, Texas. Is that where you're calling in from today, Justin?
At the moment, I'm in Midland, Texas, but
Okay.
but 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 Texas nonetheless.
Okay, perfect. So I'm excited. Gio invited you on to tell us your story. He was just referring to you as one of the pioneers of Flex, and we were talking about how you kind of fly under the radar. So I don't know your story either. So thank you for taking the time to do this with you. You're like, what are we talking about today? We like to take our guests by surprise a little bit, but we promise to have some fun.
Okay, well, I'm happy to do it. Should I just start with a quick background?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love that.
So we started this company, Boxer Property, back in 1992, shockingly over 30 years ago. And it was my older brother Andrew and I, and we bought an empty office building in Dallas, Texas. This was kind of the end of the RTC days. There were empty buildings littering Dallas and many other cities, just like they had been dropped out of an airplane with a parachute and landed next to the highway of this, kind of empty office buildings. And we were very excited to buy it at a low price, but then, realized, hey, we have this problem of how do we fill it up with tenants? How do we generate some revenue here? And the market was full of people looking for big tenants. They were looking for the traditional kind of take a full floor, have a 10-year lease, spend several years of revenue on improvements and broker commission and so forth, but they wanted a credit tenant and the commissions would be big. And it just wasn't happening. The market was not full of tenants like that. And what we realized was that nobody was paying attention to the smaller users. So we took this building, it was 110,000 square feet, and we started cutting it up into tiny spaces. And there were no frills. It was just four doors and a wall. Our very first user was about 500 square feet. And we put them kind of downstairs in the front so it would look more like there were people in the property. But
Like the restaurant approach, it'll look full
yeah, that's
sitting in the
right. That's
window.
right.
Yep.
And what we discovered was that the market was totally ignoring smaller users at the time, especially if they had no credit, especially if they only needed an office or two. So we just started chewing through the property, breaking it up into small spaces. We'd put a wall in between and a new door to the hallway, and that's your office. And through the early and mid 90s, we developed an infrastructure for doing that, and we started buying building after building. And our average tenant size was, a few offices. Typically, what would happen is there'd be a bunch of no credit tenants. They would default. Maybe we'd take a property, fill it up to 100%. We'd lose 40% of them. We'd take that 40%, fill it up again. 40% of them would go. So now we'd be at 86%
So you didn't care
occupied.
about the churn. You were
Yeah.
like, take it. We're the only guys in
Well,
town doing this. We'll just keep going.
when you're doing improvements on spec and when you're not paying a broker, because we just put a big, huge sign on the side of the building that said in-house leasing, then the churn doesn't matter as much because you haven't done a bunch of tenant improvements and you
Yeah.
haven't paid a broker for 5 years when they're going to be there for 5 months. So we became this kind of vertically integrated company because when you're doing that, you're not using the tenant's architect and the tenant's designer and your accounting department has a ton of leases to administer instead of like, 10,000 square feet tenants. You have 500 or 1,000 square feet tenants. So basically, we had to learn how to do a lot of things ourselves, and we developed an operating infrastructure that had to do with budgeting for building on spec, building generic spaces in advance, leasing them directly, and managing a large number of small users, often with common space and so forth. And that formula was enough for us for a long time because not a lot of people were doing it. You had Regis or HQ, these kind of full service executive suite operators, but this was before the era of WeWork and the co-working word even as we know it today. And so we were able to develop a model where we were executing on that strategy as a landlord. Of course, the market changed. People stopped having filing cabinets, and they stopped having telephone systems, and they stopped having receptionists, and they were doing everything with mobility and using technology. And, instead of a lot of large companies, you started having this emergence of freelancers and kind of network type companies where they would work together in a loose affiliation instead of being an actual large company. And people's tastes changed and so forth. So we wound up competing for many years against these companies like WeWork and others that were just burning cash, but they did have a positive effect on the marketplace in the sense that they raised the awareness of having shorter term use and more flexible footprints. They raised the design quotient, but also it was annoying to have to compete against them because basically landlords were subsidizing
Right.
them
Their
in a
model. Right.
yeah, massively. I mean, just landlords were paying, hundreds of dollars a foot to build out these spaces. We all know what happened with that. But in the meantime, it caused us to be very focused on how we could do more with less while increasing our design quotient, making our spaces more fun, having better systems, better opportunities for the users to collaborate. You'll notice I don't say tenants anymore because, we've gone for the smaller users to a license model.
Yeah.
But we figured it out. We have millions of square feet of this kind of space. We've developed a sub brand called Workstyle. Yep, there you go, right behind you. Um, and Workstyle is our kind of flexible space product but it is totally run and administered by the property management company Boxer on behalf of the landlord, which largely is us. And it's given us this really stable, integrated way of running flexible space that's totally different than having a third party in there operating. And we believe that the third party creates a lot of messy and unpleasant dynamics that make it difficult to really succeed in that model.
Yeah, and what I really love kind of backtracking is, I mean, the way I explain it to people is like it's almost like the apartment leasing model, right? You have someone on site at pretty much all your buildings, or did, right? I don't know if that's still the model. And then the application process and the license slash lease was a really short, easy lease, right? So someone could walk in and walk out with space. It wasn't this long process that typically is the case for traditional office space.
That's right. No, nobody wants that product anymore, except for the larger tenants that have, kind of truly unique situations. But, most of the users who just want to get in and get going and get to work and be productive, they don't need to hire an attorney. They don't need to wait 5 days before they can tour a space. They want to get going and go quickly. And they want to have a nice, pleasant, cool space that works for them. And so we have on-site leasing. A lot of our leasing is not even on site anymore. It's just virtual. We have a huge number of our leases never see paper. I would say probably 80% of our actual leases, not by square footage, but by the number of leases, are just originated, executed, and filed electronically, which of course can happen almost immediately. And then the space is pre-designed. There's all kinds of furniture. We have an art department. We have an on-staff curator, and the experience is just a really pleasant one, and people can get up and running right away.
Yeah, and I think for me also the start of your portfolio building was really interesting, right? With 20 years in the business, I still remember 20 years ago coming across your buildings, and you guys were kind of a B asset type of buyer. Even in some cases, I think I would say C plus. And now you've slowly evolved into the A class space, right? Especially in Houston and other markets, and then you've continued evolving across the country. Kind of how's that evolution been of your portfolio acquisition, kind of what y'all were searching for, kind of how has that evolved over the years as well?
Yeah, I mean a lot of the improvement has to do with bringing our touch to the property. So we can take a property that feels a certain way on acquisition and turn it around very quickly. We've got in-house architects, space planners, designers. We have a furniture team. We have an art team. We have in-house construction. And so we're able to return a lot of value to these properties just by making them look and feel and operate better. One of the things that has really been a hallmark for us, and based on current market conditions, I'm quite happy about it, is that we've tended towards suburban mid-rise, office buildings, call them, 100, 150,000 square feet, and have never really been successful in winning at the big downtown marble clad institutional skyscrapers that have law firms that are no longer using the space, or consulting firms with 5 floors who are going down to one. So the focus of our portfolio on properties that are where people live has turned out to be very fortunate, as people have rebelled against commutes and large tenants are reducing their footprint and decentralizing.
And then you've also used technology, right? Technology is a big portion that you guys have added based off of the fact that there isn't someone always on site, and kind of how you manage the portfolio and everything, which kind of leads into Stemmons and kind of the evolution of that side of stuff. You want to
Sure.
bring us up to speed on that?
Yeah, we developed some systems that work together kind of as an operations platform for real estate. And in particular, we did this because we were operating a lot of complexity. What a traditional landlord is not necessarily set up to manage flexible space. And in order to do that effectively, we needed systems. So we developed some tools that we could deploy that do things like track the conference rooms and the Wi-Fi and the leasing process and the onboarding and the offboarding and the quality control and all of those kinds of things. And as we found those becoming truly integrated into how we worked, other people started asking us, "Hey, can we use that?" And we've spun that off as a separate venture. And there are a lot of companies now that are using this kind of a product, or using our product to operate this kind of space. I think that if you try and incorporate the kind of complexity in customer service and marketing and leasing and price setting and all that you need to do if you're operating small spaces into a traditional management company, you end up really overtaxing the individuals, right? You just can't execute on that by giving people a bunch of spreadsheets and asking them to essentially become apartment or hotel operators. But the apartment and hotel software is not really designed for the commercial office experience. So having those systems really allow us to do some things that we couldn't do and to operate effectively at scale. We've got over 8,000 active customers right now, not on the software, I mean, in our real estate portfolio. And managing that without a system like Stemmons, which we're now rebranding as Brava, would just not be possible. And I think that when it comes to the leasing side of things, there's a huge number of considerations that you just don't have when you're operating a traditional office building. So we think of it a lot more like an e-commerce kind of play, right? You have products, and not just one product. You don't just have one floor, for example. You want to spin that into lots of different configurations. So you have variants of that floor, or maybe you have the whole thing shown as a space, but 10 smaller spaces or 4 bigger ones. Every kind of permutation and combination has to be created as a data element and then syndicated to all of the different aggregators who list these things. And then price, is a whole separate discipline that technology is critical for. So if you want to be pricing and repricing a large number of SKUs, you can't just do it by somebody coming in occasionally and deciding. It has to be a system. So we built a revenue management system that dynamically prices our inventory every day. And that price flows directly into the automatic lease generation, which gets sent by an electronic signature provider to the customer. And again, all of that technological infrastructure is required to execute this kind of stuff at scale consistently.
Okay, I'm gonna sneak in and ask some questions. So
Yep.
I am curious about, like, in 1992, you and your brother decide you're gonna like buy this office building, and you embark on this model that is arguably a crap ton of work. It's so much work. Like, most asset owners get into, it's passive income, right? We're gonna buy real estate, we're gonna go for the long-term lease. You're going like short term, small spaces. Now you're like vertically integrated. You've got, all these competencies on your team that, I mean, most asset owners are like, no, no, thank you. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what do you think was kind of going on with the two of you that you were like, yeah, we're going to do this crazy model that no one else does? I mean, I can't think of any other asset owners that have this is like a really unique model. What,
Yeah.
like, was it just, yeah, tell me, like, what was going on in your brain at the time?
Well, we were young, and so maybe
Young
we
and
didn't know any
foolish
better.
and energetic.
We felt that there had to be an opportunity there. And again, when you're young, and we weren't dealing with a bunch of outside investors. We didn't have a board of directors. We hadn't been working at some
Nobody told you
traditional
not to do it
company.
this way.
That's right. And the opportunity was there. And what we found was that it was kind of like that, if you build it, they will come kind of thing. But we
Yeah.
we started with some small spaces, and we put up a big sign, and people started showing up, and the experience that they were having was that nobody else would take them seriously. So it was really finding a niche that was an underserved market. And the rest, the operational competencies and things we had to build were were derivative of the idea that we were going to serve a community that was not being properly attended to.
Yeah.
And that has served us very well, because what happened is, over the years, as co-working came up, what most landlords did was basically outsource it.
Right. 100. Right. And to your point, subsidize it, and not in
And
all cases, but
in most cases. So,
mhm.
what's happening now is it's become clear, I think, to people that having a high cost specialist, who's got the wow factor, is not really a model that works. It's an extra mouth to feed at the property, and it creates these disincentives. So if I'm a landlord and I lease to, or partner with Convene or WeWork or Regis or whatever, as wonderful as those groups are, um, I'm immediately in this problem where if they get a small customer, they don't want the small customer to grow in the building. And my larger tenants couldn't use the facilities. They can't walk into the WeWork and get a free coffee or use the conference room. You know, Whereas I, as a landlord, or I may have a larger tenant who comes in who wants to take that whole floor, but I can't do that because I've leased it to
Yep.
this other intermediary. And also, frankly, the intermediary has to substantiate their higher costs by charging more
Sure.
and offering a bunch of services that people don't. I mean, there's some people that like to stay at the Four Seasons, right? Where you have a concierge and you have a facilities director and room service. But, except for special occasions, most people tend to stay at, like, a Radisson or something, where there's limited service, but it's a lot less expensive. And if you're running a small suburban accounting firm or something, you don't need to have someone hand you a vanilla macchiato every day. So what happened was landlords kind of outsourced this stuff, and they gave it over to these other groups. That model isn't really working. And now what we're seeing, and you guys are very familiar with, is there's a bit of a void in the market, and it's
Mhm.
who's going to fill it, right? Because in order to execute on that strategy, you have to be good at a bunch of operational things, but you also
Who
have to
even
be
want to
good.
do them? I mean, that there's still a huge gap there. So the outsourcing is not that simple, because
Yeah. Well, the
don't
landlords
want
may not
to.
they may not want to do it, but they have to, because you can't run a building with except for a few notable exceptions of like very special properties, can't run a traditional commercial real estate operation anymore and expect to be successful. God forbid your loan becomes due and you have a new interest rate,
Yeah.
or some of your larger occupiers are underutilizing their space and they're not going to renew. So this is the way the market is going. There's a need for it, and there's a vacuum of capability. And so, is it going to be some new breed of intermediaries, or there's a ton of startups? I know you guys are very familiar with this space. You could rattle off the list. Is it going to be the traditional brokers who adapt their business models, or will it be the landlords who learn some new tricks? And we, as a landlord who learned some new tricks, I should say we developed them over a period of time. But my personal feeling is that landlords need to learn how to operate more like a hotel. And it's not that they can't do it; it's just it's different than what they're used to.
So when you have a commercial asset, is it 100% flex, or do you have some sort of like what's the largest kind of floor plate?
Well, we have tenants that are 50 or 60,000 feet
Okay.
that are traditional tenants. So
Okay.
we have those. But on the other hand, we have some properties that only have smaller users. Typically, what we do is we start with a blend. You keep the best big spaces for large users, and then you start cutting up the remaining space into smaller ones, and then over time the property will reach an equilibrium. But we don't really recognize that much of a distinction anymore between traditional and flex because the lines are so blurry.
Yeah, no, without a doubt.
Yep. So another thing that we're seeing is, in order to operate a commercial property effectively, we've had to change our staffing plan altogether, right? So the traditional jobs are not the same, right? We have property managers giving tours. We have maintenance staff who are showing people around. We have electronic door locks to open, and people are showing themselves in. And then there's a lot more focus on community and marketing. Also, one of the things that people just don't get is frankly just answering the phones and being responsive.
Hmm.
So if you look at a traditional, like if you call up a Regis or some kind of co-working specialist, they're almost always going to answer the phone very quickly and give you information right away. But if you call up a traditional property, a landlord rep broker or something, you can almost never get them on the phone, right? They won't answer the phone on a Friday. Like, it just doesn't happen. I invite you as a thought experiment to try to call somebody and rent space. Just drive by, see a sign on your way to work. It'll be 48 hours if you're lucky before somebody gets back to you. And when they find out that you only
Sure.
have 3 people on your team, they won't care. What we do is we centralized our inbound calls. We have a central facility for that. We added overseas staff. We added overnight staff. So we answer leasing calls 24 hours a day around the world, and we have people who never leave their, they're at their station, not going on tours, but just taking calls. And those people can originate leases. They can do renewals. They're manning the chat. It's a totally different. It's like if you're playing sports and there's like the traditional defense and then there's zone defense. It's a different way of staffing for customers as opposed to for occasional leases with tenants.
Right. Because your business is a customer acquisition model. I mean, you're, again, vertically integrated, so you do a lot of different things, but it's a totally different mindset. I mean, I love the examples that you gave about your team and how you're staffed. It's a huge shift. So I think it's a long road for some folks to for a lot of asset owners to get there. I mean, because you, right from the beginning, kind of thought of the building as a product. Anthony Slumbers talks about this, like that's a really unique mindset. Like, and what are the sub products within it, and how do we innovate? You've innovated on that a lot over the last 30 years. It's a very unique approach.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. I feel very seen right now.
I mean, it's just so unique. I'm fascinated that you're kind of, yeah, as you said, earlier, like under the radar, kind of, running this model that makes a lot of sense. And I keep thinking you must like sort of kick back at night and be like, woo, I got some things right, because here we are post pandemic. I mean, I have a lot of empathy for, not empathy, sympathy, I guess, for asset owners that are traditional commercial, like you said, like handed the building back in some cases. That's,
Yep. Yeah,
Well,
that's
real
so.
quick, Justin,
Yep.
let's skid through this part, right? But I mean, you said you own millions of square feet. Why don't you get a little more specific on how many buildings, how much square footage, how many different markets, right? Because sometimes I think people hear stories like this and they think you got 5 buildings throughout Texas, but
Yeah.
that's not the case.
I think we're probably 145 buildings now, about 13 or 14 million square feet. We've got over 8,000 customers, we would call them, formerly known as tenants, and we're in a dozen markets. We own, or have controlling ownership in probably 85 or 90% of our portfolio, and then a small amount of space we operate for third parties. And I would say if you're listening to this and you're a lender who's recently taking back a property and wondering what to do with it, call our acquisitions team.
They'll answer 24 hours a day. No.
If you're a landlord and you're struggling with what's the strategy and how can we execute on this, call us, because we have various ways that we can get involved. We have a set of tools, that's the software product, that can be deployed to run this kind of a program. We've spun off our staffing business. Our international staffing business is called Relay Human Cloud, and Relay allows you to add the additional call center people, accountants. They know how to use Yardi. We have leasing analysts, web developers. Those people through Relay get assigned directly to US-based real estate companies. And then we also work with companies to help set up these programs. So we've gone to a model of having multiple ways to interact with us, and that's just another version of us trying to make sure that we can leverage our capabilities in a lot of different modes. But particularly if you're a property owner and you're staring at a lot of vacancy and don't quite know how to go about, and you don't want to pay $200 a foot for improvements for somebody to be cool, then give us a ring. We found that there's a lot of really interesting opportunities even in a challenging market, and we offer now a service called Design Build Lease, where we don't manage the property, but we'll design the space, build it out, roll it into our leasing program, and do that as a service.
Yeah, no, and so I love how forward thinking y'all were, and thoughtful you were about everything. So outside of Voxer and Workstyle and Bravo and everything else, kind of what is your passion? What drives you? I mean, we talked about your family briefly before we started recording, so give us a little picture of Justin outside of the.
Well, I'm going to admit that this is it dovetails back into work, but I'm an avid art collector and creator, and I love nothing more than repurposing found objects and combing through eBay or kind of online antique sites, and that's been really wonderful because we've been able to. Now, you don't think about this as a landlord, because normally landlords only have to do a small amount of art, right?
The lobby.
You've got, the lobby, the
in
elevator
lobby.
lobbies.
Yep.
When you have millions of square feet of collaborative space. That means, hundreds of reception areas and hallways and break rooms and everything. So what we've done is we've developed this art program where some of the things we conceive of and have manufactured, other things we acquire, and a lot of stuff we'll find, kind of interesting items, buy lots of things on eBay, deploy them. We have these movable grids that where the displays change over time. And although it's kind of work, I love that part of it because it's, the ability to come up with a creative idea and then just have endless wall space to deploy it on is really fun for me. And if you came to my house, or if I were sitting in my normal office and you saw the background, it would back up what I'm telling you.
And what about family, kids running around, all kinds of fun stuff? They're getting
Yeah,
older now.
the kids are bigger. I've got a freshman in high school and a sophomore in high school, and they're both working on their learner's permits, and it's a very different scene. I wouldn't say they're running around, but not with me. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've been spending a lot of time in Texas, of course, but you don't be surprised to find me in New York or California or Mexico City. We set up an office in Mexico City for support staff, along with India and Honduras. And now for Boxer, we have, give or take 1,200 employees. Over 300 of them are overseas, and we don't have property overseas, but that's just where they're sitting. And so for me, that means a lot of really fun travel to, to Roatan in Honduras or Mexico City or India. And that also takes up some time for me in a positive way.
No, that's great. Any plans to acquire anything internationally?
There's something we've been looking at in the UK. We've been flirting with that for a while. We're opening a UK office for our staffing business, but really we're kind of waiting on the market right now. We have a lot of dry powder from the acquisition standpoint. What we're looking for is when are the deals really going to hit, and where are they going to be? And we have still a lot of questions about these large, formerly institutional grade downtown properties. That's a concerning place to be unless you're in one of the few properties that is naturally different. Our position is that we're seeing a lot of decentralization of office use, and suburban stuff that's well located is playing very well. Although, again, increasingly we're finding companies, especially ones that are pressed financially, are they've gotten the memo that you can work from anywhere, and they don't want people working from home necessarily or working from a coffee shop. They want them working from an office, but those offices can be anywhere. And increasingly, we're finding that people are just adding international staff rather than expanding in the US for things that can be done from a desk.
Jamie, I see you jotting all kinds of notes.
I was taking notes. Well, I'm kind of curious. This is kind of going backwards a little bit, getting into the details, but how would you compare your ideal customer to one of, like a Regis or WeWork? Is it similar or is it different?
Well, I think something like WeWork tends to make more sense in a very dense, very expense market,
Yeah.
very high expense market. Regis obviously is a little different in the sense that you're not paying such a premium for design, and you're not having such a small space, right? But the question is, is there really a sense of fun there? Is there really some soul to the place? And do you need the overhead associated with having dedicated staff in the center? So like if I mean, we have Regis as a tenant, and we love those guys, and I know the senior people there, and we're all on the same team conceptually. But when they're in a property, they sign a lease, and now you are a customer not of the landlord, but there's kind of a wholesaler and a retailer, and you're buying retail. So what we find is that for a customer that doesn't need a lot of hand holding, they just want a great space to come into. They don't need somebody to wave hello to them every morning. They don't need a shared copier. They just need a place to work and a good environment that's cool and fun, but less expensive. That's our market. And we can afford to do it that way because we're not adding that extra layer of cost.
Yep.
But the people that make a lot of sense for us, it could be somebody who's small and going to stay small. It could be somebody who doesn't know what their growth situation is or wants to maintain the flexibility of, maybe they're going to take a whole floor in a year or two as they get big, and that happens to us all the time.
So, I mean, I think one of the interesting parts is also your leasing strategy from the standpoint of I shouldn't say a lot. Some of the people that I've run into that do some of your leasing don't come from the real estate background, right? The last guy I actually toured with here in Dallas and Addison came from software sales, and he was great, but he wasn't a traditional real estate guy. And so is that strategic? Is it just people are harder to find? Kind of how and why have y'all kind of deployed that model?
Well, there's two reasons. First of all, we tend to consider there to be experience bias that often outweighs the benefit of the experience. So you take somebody who comes from a place of experience and they bring with them a whole bunch of ideas about how they're supposed to do it and what their job is supposed to be. And we have a pricing engine, and the pricing engine uses algorithms and some sophisticated techniques to determine the price, and the leasing agent is not determining the price. So you take someone who used to be negotiating all the time and tell them, hey, this is the price it's coming out of this system. Or you say, look, this is not a commission driven role. Because if someone who's on commission, just think about the economics of it. If you have a commissioned broker, they don't want to send you to another property that's part of their ecosystem, but is not their deal, because they'll try to keep you in the one, even if it's not the best one for you. And if you're looking for 1,000 square feet for a year, that's 1 unit of commission. If you've 5,000 square foot tenant who will sign a 5-year lease, right, that's 25 units of commission. So the 5,000 square foot tenant by 5 years is worth 25 times the value to that broker of a smaller user. And I can't sit there and tell them to pay attention to a small user. There's nothing I can do to get them off the 25-to-1 ratio.
Not a thing.
So, yeah. So when we hire somebody, and because we have good systems, we have central appointment setting, we have automation of the leasing process, we have automation of price setting. I don't need that experience. I don't want to fight against it. And I can hire for somebody who is really good with people or who's excited about the opportunity. Whereas if you're competing as a employer, if you're competing with an employer out there based on keywords on a resume, you're basically renting somebody's keywords and being the highest bidder in the market. And then you get someone who they have experience doing something, but they may not still be excited about it, but it's the thing that they can make the most money at because of their experience. This is not a good recipe for happy, engaged team members in a competitive business. It's a recipe for people kind of, you've just paid more than everybody else for that same experience, and the person may not even be excited about the job.
Yeah.
So we really have optimized ourselves to find the best people who are really excited about the opportunity rather than just someone who knows that job because they've done it a bunch of times before.
Now, kind of shifting off of the office property type, I mean, you guys do all kinds of different property types within the commercial real estate sector. Have y'all gotten into the industrial side, and have you looked at co-warehousing or any of that stuff yet?
We haven't directly. We work with some companies that do that by providing software and systems and staff. So this is kind of leveraging some of the things we do outside of actually operating or investing. I think, industrial as a category is less operationally intensive. So, we don't seem to win on that. That's more about kind of acquisition strategy and capital raising. The co-industrial stuff is interesting to us We just haven't focused on it. We've done a bunch of hotels. We've done shopping malls. We lend. We have a lending facility. We've done residential. We've done houses. In fact, right now we invested in a 3D home printing business, and we're looking at developing some lots and rolling out a 3D printed build to lease product. So we're active in a lot of spaces outside, but office is kind of what we're best known for.
So this print to lease home model. So what market are you deploying that? What does that look like? I mean,
We have
I
our
think I find that so interesting.
Yeah, the company is called Black Buffalo 3D, and we invested in the company, so we're equity participants in it. We have submitted our first plans for permit in Fort Worth,
Okay.
and the idea is to build houses that are very durable, right? So these are concrete. The wear and tear is very different. We've done in the past, we've done, sticks and bricks type of single family homes. And, after a couple of cycles, they can get a little beat up. But the idea behind the 3D print stuff is that it's durable. We're going to print some of the interior furniture and, countertops and things like that. And I think it's compelling, especially in markets that are looking for things like worker housing, or houses that will be rented as opposed to occupied by an owner.
Wow, that's pretty great. I just looked it up, Jamie. I sent you a video of
Yes, thank you.
so I look forward to looking at. So they're doing a 4-story 3D printer will print huge buildings. So, and that's Black Buffalo. So I look forward to looking at that.
Yeah, we're excited about it, and we invest in other companies, and have kind of a venture studio type of model. Some of them are in real estate, some of them are not. There's financial services, insurance, other things, energy. But again, our main focus is operating effectively using technology and great people in the commercial real estate space.
And
So,
so go ahead.
no,
Go ahead, Jane.
I have a wrap up question, so you can go next if you want.
So as far as, I mean, it's kind of using your futurist type of hat that you've been able to kind of evolve this company through by being ahead of the curve. I mean, kind of what do you see in the horizon with the finance market and just things that are highly affecting the entire industry as a whole?
Well, I think interest rates are high and are going to stay high for a while. I think that the amount of money supply that we've contributed to the ecosystem is hard to get around. Companies that were planning for low cost of capital are going to have trouble, and projects are going to fail and go back to the lenders and kind of get worked out. I think the nice thing for existing landlords is we're not going to see a lot of new development. And so, what has happened over the last 10 or 12 years is we've not only been competing against the buildings that are on the market, but this kind of flood of new product that keeps coming in. And for some time now, that new product will be no longer appearing. And you'll see some of the older, kind of less desirable buildings change use, but it's going to be bleak for a while, especially for properties that are dependent on larger tenants and people commuting. If you can execute on a smaller, more flexible strategy, I think that's great. And I also, in the world of predictions, would say that companies will pull back on the hybrid work. I think when times are tough, it's very difficult to compete with people who are not in an office, even if it's not one big office downtown. Then you can have smaller satellite offices in different suburbs, different cities, or even different countries. But working from the office is coming back. It's just not all coming back into large concentrated downtown centers.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. All right, your research, your
You ready
closing
for my wrap
question.
up? My closing question is just, you've been doing this for a long time. Well, and you've gotten kind of lucky in that skill and luck, but there's some luck. Choosing Dallas to start with, that was lucky. Or maybe you have a crystal ball that you haven't told us about. So, and you've evolved your product over time, but you're kind of sitting in this point in time where you have, sort of right place, right product. What gets you excited? Like what's next that keeps you like waking up in the morning and being like, I get to keep doing this?
Well, first of all, the nice thing is that we're doing so many different things. They're all expressions of one core capability, which is the ability to bring together data and operational excellence to solve problems that other people are missing. And so we get to kind of point that at a lot of different things. What I'm really excited about right now is is that companies are learning that you can work from anywhere, and bringing the international staff into those mid-sized businesses. The big boys have been doing it for years. The mega companies have offices all over the place. But if you're a mid-sized company, or you're running a department that can't go set up its own overseas offices, our company Relay Human Cloud is creating these global teams and teaching US-based companies how to access those markets in ways that are regulatorily that are compliant with regulations, that are effective, that are cyber secure, and that allow them to use 24 hours of the day. And I think that's really cool because it's creating this kind of global workforce where you're creating opportunities in other countries and markets where people don't have those opportunities necessarily. And I think it's really cool and a lot of fun, and it makes good business sense. So I'm excited about that.
Do you have anything else? We promised him less than an hour. So Justin, I would say thank you for taking the time to do this, because we keep saying, you kind of fly under the radar. I didn't know the story. I'm glad to know the story. It's really interesting, the work that you're doing. It's pretty on target for the state of the work world today. So thanks for making time to share your story.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course, thanks.
All right. Thanks, guys.